Hello girls, gays, and non-binary babes. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're doing something a little bit different. I wanted to do more of a discussion video surrounding horror as a genre. So you've already read the title, you already know what this is going to be about. This is going to be about what I believe is the resurgence, the renaissance of horror in pop culture. I have been noticing this for a while now, and I kind of just want to talk about it and, you know, see if it makes sense and see if anybody agrees or if anybody has any other input. I absolutely love horror as a genre. It is my favorite genre to read, to watch, everything. I will be talking firstly about movies and then moving into the book realm, because even though I do make videos about books, horror is a bigger pop culture thing than books at the moment. So movies are a big part of this renaissance. So yeah, I am so excited to get into it, and I hope you are too. So grab a snack, grab a friend, and enjoy. Just to preface this, if you have any thoughts to add to this, maybe I'm missing something or just didn't think to add a certain aspect into this video, please feel free to comment it. I forget things all the time, so if you think there's something that should be noted, then feel free to let me know. That being said, we're gonna start with what I consider the origin of the horror renaissance, which is Get Out. Get Out is kind of the first of its kind in a way, well, in a lot of ways. First of all, it's a horror movie that centers Black people and their experience. My thoughts on Get Out is that it was enough, kind of in the same way Black Panther, when that came out, it got so much attention because it centered Black people and their experience, and therefore a lot of Black people went to see it, like a lot. And white people wanting to, whether it be look like good allies or be a good ally, whatever, even though that has not really anything to do with it, also went to see it to kind of, I think a lot of people went to just kind of say, oh yeah, I saw that, you know, I'm not racist. I feel like that's a lot of what white people do is that. So a lot of people saw this, and a big difference in this from other horror movies from years past is, one, that a lot of people saw it, and two, that it was cinematically appealing. This is a huge thing, especially in the rise of A24. If you don't know what A24 is, it is a distributing company for movies, and they make a lot of like cinematically beautiful movies, and that's primarily why I like them. But anyway, it's cinematically appealing. It's got a good plot line that's unique and never been done before, at least to a lot of people that saw it. So I think that made a huge difference. And did this immediately kick off a horror renaissance? No, but it planted the seed, and that's what is important. Another big thing about this is it's an Oscar winner, and we will come back to that later, but this being an Oscar winner and nominated for Best Picture is huge. Horror movies are not ever nominated for Oscars, so this is a huge thing, and like I said, it set the seed and it set things in motion. Next up, A24 in general, primarily Hereditary and Midsommar. I'd say Midsommar more so, because I personally still haven't seen Hereditary. I know I'm a horrible horror fan, but I have seen Midsommar, and it is still one of my favorite movies of all time. But just like Get Out, they are creating cinematically appealing movies that aren't your typical cheesy horror flicks. And I think that was a big deal. I think there's nothing wrong with cheesy horror flicks. Those are some of my favorite movies. But I think the average person looking for a movie would want something that they enjoy and is pleasing to them, and a B-grade horror movie is not going to do it for most people. So this is a big step, and it once again kind of got the ball rolling. Next, we have what is the current era of horror movies, and that is primarily X, Pearl, Nope, The Black Phone. It's like things are happening very quickly all at once. Good horror movies are being made left and right, and you cannot go a few months without seeing one in theaters. And even Smile right now, I would consider that kind of a more cheesy one. I've not seen it, but it looks to be kind of that genre, which nothing wrong with that, again, just stating what I think. But that one has garnered huge crowds. I mean, huge. A lot of people have seen it, and it's a big thing right now, even though it's not an A24 cinematically pleasing, gorgeously written horror movie. And that is why I think we're in a renaissance right now, because now people are caring less about how well the movie is made and more about the scare factor, which is a big part of horror, and that's the whole part of horror, kind of. And I think right now people are just loving it, and like I said, it all stemmed from Get Out planting that first seed and getting people interested again. And I think a lot of this overall stems from the pandemic. Get Out did come out before the pandemic, so that set the seed into the soil, and I think the pandemic watered it and gave it sunlight and let that thing grow. People being stuck inside for months, it's a horror movie in and of itself, and with not only the pandemic but the civil rights movement that is currently going on, people are feeling a lot of rage and anger, and horror is a perfect vessel to show that, to get that out. And it's like a form of therapy for people if you're like writing it or whatever. I think it's really cathartic, and I think that's why a lot of people are writing it and a lot of people are consuming that kind of media, is because it makes them feel better in a weird way. And horror has always done this, but I think recent events have really pushed it into a more commonplace kind of thing. On top of all of that, I think that a big reason why a lot of horror movies are coming out is not only because it's cathartic, but because of Get Out. It won an Oscar. It was nominated for Best Picture. Here's the thing. Now that people see that a horror movie can win an Oscar, which is practically unheard of, they're gonna make more of them, especially if they do well in the box office. And cinematically pleasing horror movies are gonna do well in the box office. So if there's that added factor of we could win an Oscar, we could make a ton of money, people are gonna make more of the movies. And even if they're that cheesy B-grade version, it's still something, and it's still adding to the renaissance. Now I want to move to books. So for those of you who aren't in the book world and are just kind of watching this video, hello, welcome. I am curious to hear what books you've heard of here, because it's very hard to kind of get a grasp on what people outside of your community are hearing and seeing. And I'm curious to know if this is like crossed anybody's radar at any point, any of these books really. I'm sure some of them will, but I'm really curious, so let me know. But anyway, now we're into books. So I think the resurgence in books, horror books, has obviously come from movies. It all stems from pretty much Get Out. But I think in the midst of all this horror movies in pop culture, books started being written again. And one, again, the pandemic, the civil rights movement, people are feeling really angry and they want to express that anger in preferably a healthy way. And so writing about it and creating art in reference to it is really great. And I think that's where we get a lot of tropes that people like Good for Her. It's definitely a revenge kind of fantasy, and things like dark academia, and especially Babel came out recently, and that is a whole dark academia book that takes on colonialism. And it's I don't want to say it's like another drop in the bucket, because that makes it seem insubstantial, but it's a brilliant novel. And I think it's a drop in the bucket of everything that people have been angry about, and they are now like releasing it because people will read it now. But anyway, where I think it started with books is, you're probably thinking Stephen King if you're watching this. And believe it or not, Stephen King is not part of this renaissance at the moment. I think smaller, more indie kind of authors and books are getting the attention. So, sorry Stephen King, but now's not your era. You were in the original era, you don't get to be in the Renaissance. Sorry, I don't make the rules. Anyway, I think a lot of this started with Grady Hendrix. And like I said before, if you can think of something like earlier than that maybe that kind of kicked it off in the book realm, feel free to add it. I'm always willing to listen. But I think it started with Grady Hendrix and the Southern Book Club's Guide to Killing Vampires, to Slaying Vampires. How did this book get so big? I'm not saying it's bad. It's just kind of amazing to me. And I think this book got big because it is a horror, but it's also mixed with a thriller. So you get that kind of domestic feeling horror thriller, but it's got vampires and all that good stuff in it, and overall it's a horror book. So I think people picked this up and it launched a lot of people into a genre that they never thought they'd like, but they really do. And that's a big part of it. And also the kind of general consensus that horror is coming back in. I don't think people really acknowledged it or are really acknowledging it yet even. But I think that it definitely was in the back of people's brains. Like, they weren't thinking about it, but it was subconsciously a thing that that was influencing them. And I think that's a big part of the book kind of era, is that they'd already seen the movies, and if you like books, you're gonna gravitate towards that now that you think you will like this stuff, like vampires. And Grady Hendrix kind of kicked it off with that. And he wrote other books. So you read the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and you're like, oh, this guy has other books. Let me check them out. And a lot of people read Horror Store. A lot of people read My Best Friend's Exorcism. It has a movie now. It's not great, it's camp, and I loved it, but it's got a movie. So now people are reading these books, and they're getting even deeper into the genre of horror, which has always been around. Obviously, Grady Hendrix has been writing books for a while, and it's not just because it kind of came into style again. So people are just now it's becoming more mainstream, is what I'm saying. The next person is kind of like when I said Get Out planted the seed and the pandemic watered it and gave it sunlight. Grady Hendrix planted the seed, and Stephen Graham Jones watered it, and gave it sunlight. The Only Good Indians is one of the most kind of underdog books I have ever seen. I picked this book up when it first came out, actually, and I was not really expecting it to get really big. I'm glad it did because it's phenomenal, but it's by an Indigenous author, and that is what's really important about this section. Stephen Graham Jones is still, obviously, he's kind of in the more present era of the Renaissance, and it's just so cool to see. I think a lot of people with Get Out and with Jordan Peele's other movies were tired of the same old white people shit. Like, you always watch a horror movie and you're like, no, don't do that. That's white people shit. And getting these other narratives and these other stories is refreshing, and people are really liking it. And I love that. I was not expecting The Only Good Indians to be as big of a hit as it is. Next is the recent huge resurgence of dark academia. It's on TikTok, it's on YouTube, it's everywhere you look. It's dark academia. And I think dark academia for a lot of people it's not horror necessarily. It's not always horror, but it's a gateway drug to horror. I think a lot of people are picking up these books and it's like aesthetic and nice, but there's also those undertones of horror, and that is leading people to pick up more and to go deeper into horror and pick out books that aren't dark academia but are kind of like it because they're horror. So I think this really added to it. Dark academia is not always horror, but a lot of the times it is like a quieter horror, and seeing that get big is a huge aspect of the Renaissance. And finally, we have a recent, it's not recent, it came out a year ago, but it's recent that I've noticed. Nothing But Blackened Teeth is a controversial one. People love it or hate it. But here's the thing, is I was scrolling through Twitter and it went back on the New York Times bestseller list recently. And like, I don't know if maybe the paperback came out and that's why I'm not sure when that one came out, like the paperback version of it. But for a horror book that is, well, one, not written by a guy of any particular race. It's written by an East Asian woman. It's a novella. It's weird. I don't know, it's not like indie, but it was not on a lot of people's radars. I discovered this book just randomly on Twitter, and I saw the cover for it and I was like, you know what, I'm interested in that. So this was not a book that was ever really being talked about until now. And I think that's a huge deal, is this being on the New York Times bestseller list. One, it contributes to the fact that we're tired of the old white dudes writing the same old horror that we've been reading for years. We want new faces, new perspectives, new stories. And these books are all giving us that, and that's why we really like it. But once again, it's all part of that rage and that anger at society right now. And that is why we're seeing all of this. It's why people are into this. And like Nothing But Blackened Teeth, you love it or you hate it, but a lot of people have read it. And I feel like middle ground ratings aren't like a huge deal at the moment. It's just that so many people have read it. And this is the one I'm most curious about. I'm curious if you're not in the book kind of realm, have you heard of Nothing But Blackened Teeth? Because it's just all over my radar, but I am also a big fan of it, and I follow the author on Twitter and all of that. So I'm just curious if other people have heard about it or seen it on some sort of bestseller list. Very curious. So yeah, I think that's really it for my video though. So yeah, if you have anything to add, please feel free. This is a really interesting topic to me, and I'm really excited that horror is coming back into style because I love horror, and it's hard to be a booktuber who really likes horror when the current big thing is romance. I'm not a big romance person, and I'm kind of just waiting for that era to end, and I think we're entering a horror era. It's kind of the complete opposite, but I think that's where we're going, and I'm really excited because I think a lot of people are going to hear about these new exciting books that they've never read before, and it's just, I don't know. It's just exciting to scare people. I just love that. I'm really excited, and I'd like to write a horror novel soon, so maybe if it's back in, it'll sell really well. I don't know. But yeah, like I said, please feel free to add anything you want down below, or just say hi if you want. It doesn't really matter to me. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.